Hello, everyone. Welcome to Homeland Security Today's ongoing series, really with CISA and one of our good friends, Daryl Hernandez, who is the branch chief for the Integrated Security Branch and chief of the Interagency Security Committee. We're very excited that we were able to connect and bring you this incredibly timely and informative webinar around tips that they have developed on involuntary employee separation. I think all of us know that a lot of things are getting more and more sensitive, and workplace safety and managing tense situations is extremely important. And so we're very proud to have Daryl here with us today, and also a Government Technology and Services Coalition member, Jenny Stone, who is the founder and CEO of Partner Forces, an LLC. That's a consulting firm that helps government and commercial clients manage risk and enhance security and strengthen mission impact. As many of you know, Homeland Security today is owned by the Government Technology and Services Coalition. Both are nonprofits, and Jenny's been a member for many years. So we're very excited to see the partnership and excited to hear what you all have to say today to keep us safe. So with that, I will turn it over to the two of you.
Thanks, Christina. So we're very happy to be with you all today, and make sure that my video is showing. But if you can all see me, that's great. And really happy with the folks that we have on. Looking at the registration numbers, we've got a really good mix of government folks and private sector, and that's right in line with the partnership that Jenny and I struck up a little over a year ago. Of course, we've been working together for a lot longer than that, but really things came about as a result of an incident that Jenny will talk a little bit later about, and great collaboration between our agency partners on our best practice subcommittee and Partner Forces. And so, Jenny, I'll ask you if you have anything you want to speak to up front before we get rolling.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that I'm super excited to be here and super thrilled with the turnout. Daryl and I thought this was an esoteric topic that might not get people interested, but the more we talk about it, the more interest there is, and people come to us and share their stories and findings, and we're just really building a wealth of understanding of the gaps that exist and the threats that exist around involuntary employee separation. So it's just awesome to see you guys. But let's just dive in, Daryl, and let me go over today's objectives. Next slide. So today, we would love to just explore the gap that we found. We're going to tee it up through a real world case study, which I'll share that my firm experienced. We're going to propose a framework for employee separations. That's a guide and encourage adoption. And then we're going to also offer recommendations on how to improve all of the aspects of the separation process, and really around those risk separations, which we'll define. So next slide.
So as I mentioned, this partnership started with a real world incident that took place, and Jenny would get into a little bit more details of that. But Jenny, I just wanted to acknowledge that as we delved into this problem area, right, this vulnerability that we saw as an organizational vulnerability affecting both government and contractors, it really was a desire to develop solutions and fill some gaps that we'll talk about later as well. And so I don't know if you wanted to highlight some of the aspects of our partnership that happened over the last year, but it really was an iterative process, from our perspective, in you having an experience, coming to a group of security professionals, and then really working with us hand in hand to develop some solutions.
Yeah, and I just have to thank Daryl in front of all of you, because we did have a really rough situation that happened, and Daryl was not the first person I went to, but should have been the first person, and really was trying to get someone to listen to me and help me kind of process what had happened and kind of prove out some of the issues that we experienced. And Daryl and his team now have taken it as in-house into the ISC as one of their initiatives that they're continuing to work. Partner Forces is continuing to work it and trying to advocate for what those of us on the private sector side can do. And, that's what this presentation is about, is like talking about the partnership, but really talking about needing both sides, the contractor side, the private sector side, and the government side actually have to take measures to close this gap together. So we'll get into all of those measures, but let me just go ahead and dive into the actual real world situation. And it's totally true that we learn more when things go wrong than we learn when things go right. And this situation really proves out this adage. So it was July 2018. Partner Forces had an employee that we had decided to separate with for performance issues and some erratic behavior. We decided the best time to do that was when she was out of the location where she worked on travel, because there were members of my team that were a little nervous about how she would react to the separation. So we planned it accordingly, knowing that there was some erraticism in her behavior. I went and let the contracting officer representative know that we were separation, this person had access, and I felt like it was really important that the access was turned off prior to the separation, because I just kind of had a funny feeling about it. So we moved forward with the separation right before the July 4th holiday. Did not go well. I wasn't even able to finish, offering, the plan that the proposal that we were putting in place, the benefits we were giving her on separation, and knew it had not gone well. It was kind of on pins and needles over the weekend. My team came back after the July 4th holiday weekend onto the government site. Upon arrival, our program manager at the government site found a threatening letter that had been left on her desk. It was threatening enough and scary enough that I thought it was super important to let the Fed sponsor of our contract know, who then elevated it to the SES that was in charge of the office. They took it very seriously. They were immediately thinking that it was one of their employees that had left the note. They decided that they wanted to pull all the videotape from over the weekend. And when they pulled the videotape, FPS discovered that someone that looked like our departed employee, that had a baseball cap on and kind of a disguise, had entered the facility, early Monday morning, late Sunday night, and had dropped the letter on our employee's desk and had left with a stack of FOUO documents and walked out of the facility. That was obviously super alarming and, set off a lot of alarm bells that really sent me and our customer on a journey to figure out, what protocols were followed, what wasn't followed, what happened. Thankfully, they were so appreciative of all of our early efforts to try to get her badge turned off, because we had that kind of spidey sense about it. What had happened is that email had been sitting, and it was over the holiday weekend, and no one had seen it and turned off her badge until later, and she had already committed the act that she committed. So that is the story that started us on this journey. And the immediate thing that I started doing after that happened was, how did this happen? And honestly, I was looking at ourselves like, what did we mess up? And so I went back through all of our contract language, the contract, and I saw nothing about notifying the contracting office of employee departures. Of course, for key personnel and for classified contracts, often find language around working with the government on approvals around new people coming on board to replace key personnel. Classified contracts are a different animal. But on just a regular contract, a government services contract, there was nothing in there about how to follow any sort of protocols or rules around notifications. So in my mind, there was this opportunity where, that government contract employees could be departed, yet still have access to government facilities. And so it was very concerning. And then, I went and knocked on a bunch of doors, and Daryl was the first one that really said, there's something interesting here. Let's kind of dig into the different kind of regulations that cover this area and the guidance that exists. And he got really curious with his team. And I think that really launched us, Daryl, onto this effort of, we did a lot of fact finding for a long time, trying to like really figure out what was going on here. And maybe there was something that we had missed. Maybe there was something in the FAR, maybe there was something in HSPD 18 that we had missed. But I don't know if you want to share kind of what your government perspective was after hearing about that story and kind of where your mind went.
Yeah. So the first thing was, that really hit me was, here was a situation where I feel like you did everything right. And I know that we can always improve, but like what was so striking to me was we had an organization with an at-risk person. They read the tea leaves, so to speak. You did all the right notifications, and the system or the process failed us collectively, right? And so, it a lot of times that first step, right, that recognition of risk is not done, right? So that's where things fall down, and then understanding. Sorry. Understanding that, one of the recommendations that came out of this particular situation was providing guidance to management on how to identify concerning behaviors, and then include specific steps they should take to report a risk or perceive that. You did that step, right? But we still felt that it was important that that we highlight that as sort of a key recommendation out of it. You guys have very good records of government furnished equipment, PIV cars, access cars, and things like that. And so that sort of reinforced this notion that we've got to have good inventory of those types of things for folks. And then what another recommendation that came out of kind of looking at this was who needs to know. And again, here I think you notified the Corps and you notified the folks that you felt needed to be notified, but because it sat in somebody's email box, or there some redundancy issues and kind of this question of who else needs to know. That clearly came out as another sort of finding, if you will, a recommendation where we ought to have a ready list as part of our protocol of who needs to know. And then kind of another recommendation or finding that came out of it was this notion of timely badge returns. I know we're going to talk about some of the NIST standards and some of the gaps later on, so I won't get too far into that. But bottom line is a lot of times employee separations are cookie cutter. And really, at the end of the day, that's what we're here on this webinar about. That's what this adverse separation best practice is about, is you can't be cookie cutter. Because if you're cookie cutter, you're going to be cookie cutter to kind of your low risk or your average separation. So you need to have a process in place to be able to treat these adverse or high risk separations differently than what you do for the other ones. So I think those are a couple of key things. We'll talk a little bit later about post-separation vigilance too. So it's not just what you do leading up to the separation and the notification of the separation, but what do you do afterwards? And I think you guys were served well by the folks who were willing to go and look at the camera footage, and then be able to identify that. And so I think there's some lessons learned about post-separation vigilance that we'll explore a little bit later on as well. So that's kind of my perspective. I think at the end of the day, here was an organization that we felt was taking all the right steps, but the system and processes, they failed us. And so everything else is about how do we set up the systems and processes so that doesn't happen again.
Exactly. And it's, Daryl and I have reflected now about this and really how all the people, process, and technology solutions that we have, and they're so focused on the onboarding. Think about onboarding and how how much we obsess about the onboarding of who you let in the doors. We don't obsess on the same way on the way out. And so I think one of our big thoughts is it just needs to be more balanced, right? Because those people leaving your organization take a lot of knowledge with them. And if you think about the whole insider threat piece, there's a lot there, right, to be concerned about. And then anecdotally, you guys know that even software and Microsoft Office isn't very focused on how you exit an employee. How easy is it to add somebody into a system? But when you have to exit them from a system, I mean, we're manually removing people from Teams chats, and it's just the whole world seems to be so focused on the entry, but not on the exit. And so we just really hope that this helps people balance it out. The last thing I wanted to share, Daryl, before we move on, is just this was a real world example, and we wanted to make sure we kind of dug into what the actual stats are around terminations and violence, or terminations and other kind of adverse activity. And it's really hard to find timely statistics and sources. I'm going to be reaching out to SHRM and to OSHA to try to dig in and see if they have some things that are in the works that aren't published. But right now, OSHA reports 2 million workplace violence incidents a year. And in a Department of Labor focus group on workplace violence, they found that 46 of those incidents involved coworkers' response to a negative review, and 27 specifically were in response to being fired and terminated. So we know that there is something there that the broader numbers and the world numbers is pointing us to stay on this path. Next slide. So as far as what we actually found in the regulation, this is the gaps that we found. And please, if you guys know of more, we're still gathering information, and this is a living project here. We found that, that there's some gap in how non-networked physical access control systems are relied upon, and really that each federal agency and probably each contractor agency has a different system in place. It's so bless you if you have an enterprise-wide system where you literally flip a switch, but most often the case, there's multiple things to turn off to remove someone's access. So that's why if you can immediately recover a PIV card in your hand, that is the safest way to do things, but it's not always possible, especially with post-COVID environment with remote separations. There's an absence of this doctrine around high risk separations. There's an absence of a kind of identification of the fact that there are different levels of separations. And for those things that are more high risk, and we'll talk about what makes something high risk, there isn't a protocol or a process in place to elevate those to the top of any list. There isn't any requirements around having to remove access within, less than the 18 hours required under HSPD 18. And then the FAR itself doesn't have any contractual language that requires government contractors to do certain things around certain notifications around the separations they're making, despite the fact that often the people that they're separating have access to both the systems and the physical places where the government does its business.
So Jenny, what I'd like to add kind of here, I think, is, why is this? Why are these gaps? And I think, it's important to sort of highlight that, most of these things are written for normal separations, right? Like they weren't written, they were written for large volumes of separations. What's the minimal that needs to be done? And so, none of them were written with kind of high risk separations in mind, which is all the more, I think, imperative that people continue to look at this area. We continue to explore, best practices associated with this, because I think one of our goals, in terms of a call to action, would be at some point to remedy some of these gaps. That may or may not be possible, given impact and return on investment for doing it. So it may be that in the near term, and it probably will be that in the near term, that this continues to be a best practice, instead of something that is more of a requirement. So just wanted to highlight that.
No, I think that's really important. Next slide. I think we're going to start diving in then into some of the guidance we've started, you and the team have started creating and sharing across the community.
Yeah, so the document, and we showed a cover of it, and the QR code will be on at the end. We encourage you to access it. It's on our public facing website. Covers a couple areas, and we're going to go through basically the bones of the document at this point. It starts with a section on pre-separation, right? And the imperative in this one is to develop a policy and processes and have them in place before you have a high risk separation issue. And that sounds pretty benign, and that sounds pretty administrative, but you would be surprised at the friction and that you can encounter in an organization with just trying to get someone to take this on. And so one of the things that I would highlight as part of sort of this idea, we'll develop a policy and we'll develop a process. Okay, who's going to own that within your organization? I think that's who's got primacy for this. And you would think that, okay, well, this is a security issue, it's a risk issue, so security should have primacy, and that may be the case in your organization. But it could be that your organization, it's better situated in an office of professional responsibility or within the HR department. So I don't think there's a right answer for who has primacy, and you need to have an advocate. You need to develop an advocate within your organization that's willing to take this on and develop it. And I'll give you an example. There was an agency that I was discussing this particular topic with, and I was talking to their security folks, and a very security-minded agency with a very much a security-focused mission set. And when I brought this up to the security office, I didn't really get much reaction, right? Which surprised me, right? You would have thought this is a risk issue, this is a security issue, therefore the security office is just going to take this and they're going to run with it. That doesn't always happen, right? And I think some of it, has to do with, well, that's an HR issue. Separations are an HR issue. But this is really a collective issue, right? And so, the collaboration piece of this is you've got to get all the right people to the table. Even if you do have primacy, you've got to have all the right players at the table, whether that's employee labor relations, management, legal. If you've got a visitor management function within your organization, it may be separate from other things, or a facilities element. Certainly your security folks should be involved in that process. And then the other sort of thing that we would argue for is that part of that plan and process includes a timeline, right? So there are checks, and somebody's responsible for ensuring those checks take place, and there are shared expectations about what's to be done, who's to do it, and when it's supposed to get done. Certainly, we would. And you'll see when we talk about the kind of notifications, this imperative to treat employees facing separation with dignity and respect. And so some of you may or may not notice the word, using the word separation. We're not saying fire. We're not saying terminate. We're steering clear of even terminology that just can add to the risk associated with it. And then, before you face a situation like this, you need to have a threat assessment team capability. A lot of organizations have a threat assessment team as either part of their workplace violence program or their insider threat program. But certainly you want to have that capability to inform the risk assessment. We'll talk a little bit about the risk assessment process a little bit later on, and then ensure that they're involved in moderate to high risk separations. I wouldn't go so far as to say they need to be involved in every separation. You obviously, everybody has resource constraints that they deal with. But the document will give you a list of offices or capabilities or functions that you want to involve in this process, and so, to include, if there's union representation necessary as well. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Jenny.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it's, to foot stomp what you said about there's no one size fits all approach to a policy and a plan around separations and getting, it's really based on the, your organization, the authorities you've assigned, your risk tolerance. Like right now, after Partner Forces has dealt with something like this, we have a lower risk tolerance right now, right? We've seen it happen. And then the culture of the company. And then, really there's a lot of pre-work you need to do so that you can train and educate all of your managers about the process and all of the threat assessment pieces that are, and that's probably happens in sometime during the orientation. I don't think it needs to happen on day one of when people join your organization, but it needs to be something that's normalized, that people are familiar with, because there is some pre-separation work that you need to have that help you, allow you to feel confident when you're going into the risk assessment process that you need your managers to be aware of. And so getting everyone on board before you're at a point of separation is super important.
Thanks. Next slide. So one of the things that we offer in the document is a risk assessment protocol. So a way of binning risk. And it really, the two variables that we focused on was the nature of the separation and then behavior, right? Present behavior. And so this is an example of what you'll see in the document. This is a way, this is a starting point for an organization to look at that. Your organization is going to be unique. And so the things that make in a separation high or moderate risk for you are going to be different than others. But this is a good starting point. And I would say it's a starting point not only for the organization, but it's a starting point for the risk assessment. I don't think this is the end all be all, and we'll talk about the process a little bit. But if you will, this is like that initial estimate of risk. Looking at the nature of the employee situation, and then you support that with your observations, your interactions that are happening with the employee during notification, post notification, and so all of those inputs will refine your actual risk assessment process. But I think this is a good start. I think it gives folks something they can hang their hat on as a way of binning risk. And I just wonder, Jenny, from your perspective, based on your experience, is this something, an approach you guys are taking?
Yeah, no, it is. So we now have different protocols, whether it's low, moderate, high on the pre-separation planning. But of course, in all things security, it's dynamic. And in the example that real world example I shared, really, I would have put the separation at moderate going into it. It quickly moved to high risk once I separated with her, how she responded and reacted in that moment to the separation. All the red alert was going off. And so, it's just a reminder of how important it is to be flexible and then move to that higher level and have those processes in place. And, looking back, of course, I see mistakes in how we handle it once I knew it had moved to high, and I could have probably been more aggressive about getting someone on the phone. Of course, hindsight's 2020, but I think that's really important to know that there can be movement within these levels. You can also move from moderate to low, right? A person can respond and say, I'm so relieved. This has been just not the right job for me. And it's been hard. And I've been, there can be so many situations. You have to be open to change. Because also solid separation planning takes a couple of weeks. I mean, sometimes you're gathering information, you're talking to the lawyers, you're talking. So like in that time, it's an evolving situation. So I just want to say this is a starting point for binning, but be open to going either lower or higher as needed based on behavior you're seeing and things that you're sensing.
Thanks, Jenny. Next slide. And so there's a risk assessment methodology that we also offer through here. This doesn't really differ from a lot of other risk assessment methodologies that you might have, whether you're doing a risk assessment of a facility or you're doing a risk assessment of an individual. It's just a good reminder that, as we alluded to in the previous slide, that this is a continual process, that our structure and our approach to it, to developing a risk management strategy, that it's helpful to follow a set of steps and to have those sort of as a guiding principle. But at the end of the day, what we want to attempt to get our hands around with the risk assessment is what's the risk, what is the risk associated with this particular separation, and then from that, tailoring our actions and activities as a result of that. Anything you want to add about?
Yeah, I just would say, we're very conservative, and you don't have to be precise, but we're super conservative as a company and are more likely to go moderate or high if we sense anything. Every organization is different. We're a small business. Large businesses can't probably be as conservative because they're having to process so many people. The other thing is just be really curious with your technology and how things are turned on and off. We learned just in the last month that one of the cool micro reward platforms that we use called Bonusly wasn't a single sign-on with our OS 365. And so we had terminated an employee, or they had left. I don't know if it was or separated, and it was a low separation, but they still had the ability to go in and talk to coworkers post-separation. And thankfully it was, loved working with you, great. But like that was a wake-up call for us that there was a system disconnect there that we discovered. And so really making sure that it's part of the risk assessment process. It's like a circle that goes around, but then also you're going back and learning from each situation, because I guarantee you will learn something new if you look at each one of the separations and then tweak accordingly, tweak your policies accordingly.
Yeah, thanks. Next slide. So the document also talks about some best practices associated with the separation. Obviously, the physical and logical access, should coincide closely with the separation notification for moderate and high risk separations. And then Jenny, you brought up a good point about it. What are the other systems out there that you think you have everything turned off, and maybe that's not so much the case. A lot of these things might seem kind of basic, but you'd be surprised at how some of the notifications are highlighted. So we definitely wanted to emphasize a couple things. One is that the meeting, if it's going to be done in person, make sure that it's private. The person who's delivering the information, ought to be honest and empathetic and non-combative. You've got to provide clear information about post-separation arrangements. And so one of the best practices associated with that is not to provide too much information during the notification verbally, because that individual is going to be absorbing this life-changing event, and they're going to be thinking about a lot of things. But how long their benefits are going to last is probably not going to be one of them. So a good approach is to have handouts that the individual can take with them and they can read after the notification meeting. Another best practice is a follow-up in a day or two, maybe by phone with the individual, and to answer any questions, and then let them know during the notification, we're going to call you in a day, we're going to call you in a day or two. And if you have questions during that time, write them down, and we're going to be following up to to cover that with you. And then obviously recovering the equipment and things like that. We've hit on that. Sometimes more of a challenge for remote worker considerations, right? How is that going to happen if you do have a remote worker? And just to reinforce this notion that all of our processes and systems, when it comes to this area, are built for our normal, average, run-of-the-mill separation. I know, Jenny, you had an experience where you were trying to get the physical and logical access turned off for an individual, and the organization wanted the individual to sign paperwork to make that happen.
Yes, which makes it challenging, right? Because we had a remote employee and we were trying to get her logical access turned off prior to us separating her. And that was the big, obstacle, was the government wanted us to fill out a form. And so it started a whole discussion, and then we looked at it and said, okay, we're not going to get this resolved. We have to move forward with the separation. I felt like the risk had been managed, but things are popping up, right? Where, and Daryl, you and I talked about how the community just isn't used to talking about medium and high risk separations, and why maybe that form really makes it difficult to do this in the safest, most secure way possible. But the one thing that I am like, if I could tell anyone that is on the contract side, because that's what I'm a CEO of a contract company. I don't want to speak for the feds, but like trying to get that positive confirmation when you're doing remote separations that access has been shut off prior, that's like the silver bullet. That will help you breathe a sigh of relief, because that person cannot go back and do anything at that facility or do anything with their laptop to harm the government or harm people, the brand, all of that. So that's the one thing, if you can be really kind of a stickler about, is trying to get that positive confirmation for remote separations.
Thanks, Jenny.
The next,
I'll let you lead on the next slide. I think you know a bit more about it than I do.
Oh gosh. So on contractor separations, because there is not language right now to follow in the FAR, Partner Forces has established kind of a guidance document that we're now following, and we want to share with anyone else that wants to be really proactive and take this seriously on kind of the big steps you need to take to separate from the government. I know we all care about keeping our own employees safe, but then we all work alongside each other, right? In the government space, both feds and contractors. So it's really important that we establish some procedures around the separation that make sure that we're doing everything that we can to make sure that it's a safe and secure, and there's not any problems when when a contractor is moving off a contract. I don't really know what more to say about here. You need to establish your policies. I would be curious about going in and looking at the language that's in your contract now, and seeing what they say and just looking at the differences. I would be curious if anybody wants to share with me the things they're finding. I only have access to the contracts that we have, and as a small business, there's not tons of them. But I mean, across the enterprise, it would be really great, I think, Daryl, to also see what other agencies are using and kind of compile that. I know that we're really curious about what works in some organizations. I think anecdotally, we found that for contractor separations, those organizations that are gun toting have stricter policies on the separations because of the firearm factor. And that tends to be more law enforcement organizations. So we're just still really curious about this issue. We know there are gaps, but we're also just really interested in the world of contracting language, what exists out there. And maybe there's some good models that we haven't we have not thought about. So this is a big area that we can continuing to study and research.
Thanks. Next slide. So one of the things that the document also offers is a removal or exiting security checklist by those high-risk protocols. So high, medium, and low. They are variations on a theme in some cases, in that similar actions, but maybe they're happening more quickly in the case of a high-risk individual, or in some cases, they're actions that are being taken at the high and medium risk level that are not taken at the low risk level. So this is just a snapshot. There's a lot more detail in there. I think there's about 3 pages to this actual checklist as well. So definitely this is a start to ensure that in a situation like this, there's a roadmap. Right, there's a roadmap for actions and when they're supposed to take place, and then there's a shared understanding of who's supposed to do what to whom.
Yeah, and I'll add, Daryl, that the nature of how business is conducted with the government on the private sector side, there's often the prime sub relationship, and oftentimes, you may be working underneath a prime that's not familiar with policies around high risk separations, and you might be the subcontractor and trying to manage a high risk separation through a prime contractor that isn't knowledgeable about it, hasn't thought about it, and you're trying to push and make sure that certain things are being followed, yet you don't have full authority to do that engagement with the CO and the core, excuse me. And so I think when you're starting a relationship with the prime sub relationship, if you do have a policy around adverse separations, as part of the onboarding to that new relationship, really starting to talk about it and see if you can get them on board so that you can, work through things when they come up. And obviously, if you're a prime that already sees the world this way, then you're going to be pushing down those requirements to your subcontractor. So for partner forces as a prime, we're going to develop guidelines that then our subs have to follow to cover that. But it's just another thing that really needs to be discussed, another layer to manage between the contractual piece between prime and sub.
Next slide. And as we alluded to earlier, there is a section on post-separation vigilance. I mean, there are certainly some things that you are going to want to keep track of, and there's some things that you might have to get some legal counsel on if you're going to be trying to follow social media or things of that nature. But there's some basic things that should be done. Certainly continuing to assess that demeanor. And Jenny did a good job of highlighting that early on. To either raise or lower that risk level. Should be proactive communication with peers and colleagues to report any threatening or harassing messages. It's in an extreme case, you maybe want to be proactive about asking the security force to review camera footage on the exterior of the facility. Certainly, you would want folks to immediately report if a separated employee did return to the facilities. And then, basic, good security hygiene in terms of training employees on how to recognize concerning or suspicious behaviors. Next slide. Jenny, did you have any lessons learned from post-separation vigilance to share?
Just the one thing I wanted to share is that there's a natural tension in the post-separation period between trying to protect the privacy of the situation with the departed employee and your employees that remain. Yeah. And that's just something that has to be delicately balanced, because if it is a high-risk separation, more information needs to be shared so all can be part of keeping the facility and the team safe. I just wanted to acknowledge that it's not easy and that it will once again be, like some of the other things, a one-size-fits-all approach, that you're working with your team at that moment to figure out how far to share the information to make sure you're getting that level of security and safety around that, the post-separation vigilance time period. So that's all I wanted to say, Daryl.
Thanks.
And then, Daryl and I recognize that we just shared a lot of information. And some of you may have some level of these procedures and policies in place, and some may not. And so we thought, well, if we were just starting out this and trying, reacting to our presentation, what are the top 3 things to kind of start getting curious about? And the first one is just, like I said, going back and looking at the contract language that governs those access control procedures between your company and the federal agency, and just really understanding what's in there now and where you see your own gaps, where you might want to make sure for the current work that you have, how you're going to fill in those gaps when you do have separations. Really starting to talk about with your clients how you prioritize and communicate the different levels of separations, and understanding what it takes to turn things off when it's time to actually remove that logical access, and how hard it is. It would be really awesome to kind of know what those steps are and who has control over each step, and just really mapping that out. So if you do have to do something fast, you know what it's going to take. And then just looking at your overall out processing procedures, and using our guide as just a starting point to start maybe pulling in some things that are going to shore them up. Those would be the key areas of inquiry, I would think. Daryl, you have anything to add here that you would start looking at?
No, I mean, I think you hit it. Do you have the processes in place? Do your existing processes, do they need to just be tweaked, or does this need to be like its own kind of separate policy that you need to put in place? So I think sitting down with the same folks we talked about earlier, the HR folks, and that is a really good starting point. That's what we want to do with this webinar. We want to spark your inquiry into your organization, how you do things, and how whether I think they may be recording the webinar, maybe you can share that with other parts of your organization. Certainly you're going to have access to the best practice that we put together. Yeah, I mean, that we want to tee this up for you and your organization so that you can reduce risk.
Yeah. And then I think our call to action on the next slide is, just reinforces what Daryl just said. Hopefully this is going to be something that you can take back to spark that internal discussion within your organization, whether you're in the federal agency, state and local, or a private sector. We want you to start thinking about how you're going to prioritize and encourage some process around the high risk piece, right? Just to get people to the front of the line and have those special procedures in place. And then just really looking at all of your offboarding, planning to separate, the pre-separation piece, and then post procedures. And I know that Daryl and I are both super open to talking about this topic, and hopefully our contact information can be shared, because as we get more information, we can turn the anecdotes we're hearing into more solid foundational kind of things that we can analyze, and that will really guide the work that we're continuing to do around this area. Daryl, anything to add?
No. I think you've taken away. I think we've got some time for some questions. I know the next slide's got the QR code
Cool.
up there for folks to explore. So, Christina, back over to you.
Excellent. Well, we have a statement, and then we do have a question. And so if you're still on the line and have questions, please enter them and we'll try and get all of them answered. But one individual said, according to regulation, the CAC badge should be revoked in the system. If that happens, the subject will not have access to government systems or installation. The security office should collect the CAC badge at the time of termination. So I think you all did cover that pretty well.
Well, yeah, but here's the gap, right? So the NIST standard says that and that it needs to be revoked within 18 hours. Okay. So let's talk about what can happen in 18 hours, from a separation. A lot. And so in some organizations, we get the benefit of very large departments and very small agencies. And so when we were looking at this problem, I talked to a very large department, and we were talking about the 18-hour standard and how it's just not good enough. in a high risk situation. And one of the things that the individual said is like, we have hundreds to thousands of people transitioning on any given day. So even meeting the 18-hour standard for them was difficult, right? So you've got this potential for 18 hours being too long to revoke it, which is the NIST standard, and then you also have the reality of for a large organization with a lot of turnover, maybe they're not even able to meet the 18 hours. But here's what I would say: if you've got a policy or a process in place to deal with a high risk separation, it doesn't matter if you're meeting the 18-hour standard or you're not meeting the 18-hour standard, because your organization now has the tools to manage the risk for that one-off that you really need to be concerned about. And so I think that just underscores the importance of having a process in place within your organization.
Absolutely. We also got a question. Can you include the name title of the NIST standard of 18 hours? And people are asking if they can have this presentation, and I mean, it's recorded, and we assumed we'd be putting it up at Homeland Security today. So
I probably can't pull it up right to this minute, but
we have a one-pager, Daryl, too, that kind of lists it and has that language that we could probably get out too.
Yeah, and I'm probably for certain that it's referenced in the document as well. So if you go to the document, you should be able to find it there.
Great. And we will share the slides if that's okay with all of you. They're kind of online, so absolutely. And then we have a question about please elaborate on the applicability of HSPD 18.
So I'm not an expert on that. I'm not going to try to take that on and do math in public, but I do want to highlight something that came in on another question. Somebody asked if you reached out to ACES International, and they both have guidance and subject matter experts with experiencing this type of thing. Absolutely, we did. And so one of the folks who is cited in the document is Sean Ahrens, and Sean does a lot of work in the space. And in fact, pre Jenny and I getting together on this particular problem, I had been at a global security exchange. I had heard Sean Ahrens speak, and so I was already maybe a little bit heightened awareness and interest in this thing. So I think that probably also helped Jenny when you came to me with this problem, because I had heard folks, security professionals speak to this. So we absolutely did consult. Sean gave us some of his new resources, and we actually incorporated that into this document.
Yeah, and I think I misspoke. I meant HSPD 12, not 18. So the person who is confused, it's HSPD 12. And that governs the identification standard for federal and contractor employees. So that's not the biomedical 18 one. So sorry for any confusion. And Daryl, the thing that was really interesting at the SIA conference was like there were a lot of tech vendors there listening to our presentation. And there was a lot of discussion how, as we get more enterprise systems in place, will this make it more easy to do those quicker terminations? And I think that it will, but I still think it's going to require training and having a policy in place. But I think that having the tech in place where it is enterprise and network, and you can press a button and shut it down, that is going to help us absolutely to do that. So sorry for the confusion on the 12 versus 18 HSPD.
And not only did we solicit some of the security professionals at ASIS, but Jenny and I will be presenting on this topic at this year's Global Security Exchange as well.
Yeah. Excellent. There's an additional layer of complexity for involuntary 1811 separations that should be considered in policy.
Yeah, I think there are absolutely, not only just for 1811s, but so I'll share with you. I was talking to the folks at the Office of Personnel Management, and one of their concerns was that in the protocol we had a retirement was kind of low risk. And again, this just goes to show you how everything needs to work, to your particular organization. And they expressed to me that they have actually been having a lot of threats from annuitants from the government. And so for that organization, based on the work they did, maybe engagement by a retired employee would not be so low risk for them. So I do think absolutely, whether you're in 1811, whether your business is about HR or your business is about cybersecurity, if you're an innovator or you got property rights that you've got to be concerned about, your considerations are going to be a little bit different and need to be refined from what we offer in the manual.
And we have just some other comments. Local policy SOP can change that 18-hour. We revoke access at the time of termination. And then the 17 hours is often difficult for normal departures. However, an internal process for high-risk departures is key. That works for our agency. And a thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, I want to thank you both for joining us, and certainly all of our folks who joined online. We really appreciate seeing you here with us at Homeland Security today. We hope you will join us next time, and certainly to subscribe to our free weeklies. My dog really says you should. I'm here and barking. But we appreciate your time today. And Daryl and Jenny, thank you very much for forwarding safety in the workplace. And we look forward to our next webinar with you.
Thanks, Christina.